Okay, so now we're looking at the, the Rider-Waite-Smith nines, and there is a ton of detailed information in these cards. And one thing I like about these cards is that they have no words on them, so they don't hit you over the head with really overpowering slogans. They let you draw everything you need out of the cards. And in some ways, you don't really need to read a book on it. You just need to look at the card long enough and think about what the imagery speaks to you and how it can be relevant to somebody who's sitting across the table from you asking a question. So remembering that swords are the intellect and pentacles are kind of the material. Here we've got a picture, again, the Nine of Swords, right? So this is the one that we were talking about that's quite challenging and quite difficult and represents this kind of anxiety that keeps you up at night. So you've got a lot of stuff going on here. I've heard it said that this is the hardest card in the tarot because it feels like there's no hope. It just goes, it's like torture, essentially. And it's our self-torture. Um, and what's interesting is this is a very comfortable and elaborate bed, and there's a bedspread, and you see on the bedspread is actually all the planets and astrological signs. So that is showing us this person is in actually living in luxury and comfort, and yet they're undergoing. So they're protected and kept warm, but they're undergoing, various different processes of guilt and anxiety. The picture here, carved into the bed, is of the biblical story of Cain slaying Abel. So Cain is said to be the first murderer, he killed his brother with a stone. So this person is essentially racked with guilt. And this can be, I mean, that could be go back to sort of that's very primordial crime. And most people get this card are not actually guilty of murder, but they may feel like they are for something or another. So that it can be that emotional knot that it has a high level of intensity. And so it drives the mind to spin and to analyze and to try to figure out solutions. And like I said, sometimes the solution is just to breathe um, and to feel and to step back from judgment. But in any event, this can be a very, very, very difficult, challenging card if you see it in a spread. So if you're reading for someone or for yourself and you see this come up in a spread, you can have a very strong reaction to it. You'll not be happy to see it. You might even be afraid of this card. It's not good to be afraid of tarot cards if you're a tarot reader. I've heard stories of people taking difficult cards out of the deck so that they only give readings that are positively reinforcing. And I think that really, um, in 90% of the circumstances, excuse me, 90% of the circumstances, that would not be a good idea, in my opinion, because it's really giving an unbalanced picture. Now, maybe, sometimes children draw cards. Even so, I would just give them I probably wouldn't give them a reading at all. I was like, ask them to give me a reading. What do you think about this stuff? But here we've basically got a picture of a difficult situation, but we should be happy to see this card, paradoxically, because it is the solution to what the issue is. And that's, again, another place where the rider weights are excellent um, for kind of digging into an issue and providing solutions. So we can turn our attention to the flowers, which represent blessings. and the the protection of the heavens, and the fact that we are processing natural emotions, and we're working through our imperfections, and so we can alleviate some of this pain, and we can again remind ourselves to just watch it and let it go. So this is that reminder, right? That training to counteract the amnesiac tendency that we have of getting wrapped up in our stress and wrapped up in our anxiety of thinking it's the end of the world, which it isn't. And here we have as a contrast the Nine of Pentacles, and this is quite a nice card. Although I've heard people say it's sort of a lonely card. She doesn't look overwhelmingly happy. She looks this kind of oh hum. Well, this is a card known as Gain, um, the Lord of Gain. Slow and gradual accumulation of benefit. So investments that are conservative in nature, or living a comfortable life, spending time in the garden, um, and that kind of thing, but not exciting, boring, in that kind of, um, boring in a good way, uneventful. We've got two trees, which kind of look similar, but they have that kind of pillar effect, so they give the feeling of equilibrium. There's a castle, which represents, wealth and influence and power. There's a bird and a snail and some grapes, and there are flowers on her robe. So the bird, so I've asked a lot of people, what kind of bird do you think this is? And most people will say like a parakeet or something like that. I'm like, now look at the glove that she's wearing and ask yourself again what kind of bird it is. And after people have looked at the glove, they tend to think, it's a funny glove for a lady in a garden to be wearing. And it's a weird looking bird. Boom, it's a falcon. So it's a hooded falcon. If you're familiar with falconing, it's a practice, it's a medieval practice of training falcons to essentially return to the falconer, and they will go and they will hunt for things. But they fly in these big spiral patterns known as gyres. So the idea is that this falcon wearing the hood, which blinds it to a certain extent, causing it to fly in these spirals and then return to the glove. This falcon will go way up and it'll survey the territory and it'll look for things, and then it'll come back down and it'll land on the glove. So what this represents is the mind. So the mind, and in some ways, this is the upper triad. So we already have these three triads that I mentioned. They're so the ones, twos, and threes, the fours, fives, and sixes, and the sevens, eights, and nines. They're already here in the lowest triad. So we're already kind of foreshadowing their existence. So the falcon represents the mind's ability to soar to great heights and to gather a general picture of everything. And the tarot is certainly that. It's a general picture of everything. Now you can zoom in on the details, but it is a like a falcon's flight across the human experience, from great despair to victory to all sorts of things. But uh, highly varied, kind of terrain. But the important thing is this mind is spiraling upwards here. And then in contrast, if you go all the way down and look at this snail, the snail is also a spiral creature. Isn't that an interesting thing that you have these two spirals in this card? I love this card. I think it's a very, very useful and interesting and intelligent card. And this spiral for the snail is different. It's an involuting spiral. It's going into the very small. into the detailed. So this is the spiral of focus. So this is the spiral of the general survey, and this is the spiral of focus. So this is when you hyper focus on a task or on the details of your day-to-day living, like cleaning or and they say, focus on the details. Don't get too caught up in the big picture. Know it, but don't get lost in it. And at the same time, focus on the details. But again, don't get so lost in the detail that you disconnect from the big picture. So this is kind of the macrocosmic mind and the microcosmic mind. So this is the lower triad, and this is the upper triad. So it's interesting in that it's there, and that gives us the the third spiral. So the falcon spirals upwards, the or outwards. The snail spirals inwards, but the grapes, see, look at that vine, they spiral across. And I think that's really fascinating that these three dynamics have showed up here. And the grapes, we must remember, are food for both the snail and the bird. So grapes and the woman. So the woman is a bridge. This is the person who is a bridge between the full abstract mind, the close attention to detail, and what amounts to the social life of human beings. Because grapes, of course, represent the capacity to feed people, to make wine, to have celebrations. So this implies human social behavior. So this is if this is the macrocosm, this is the microcosm. This is what we would call the mesocosm or the interpersonal. So in many ways, this is knitting everything together, and she's like a bridge. So growing the grapes. So without the grapes, she wouldn't have the snail or the bird. So she's kind of cultivating this garden and it is resulting um, in the wealth of above and below. And so that's an interesting thought. And so it takes us back to the theme of the card, which is gain, but it's again slow cultivation. So this is gain in the sense of cultivation of spiritual qualities, material qualities, social realities, slow conservative investment, monetary or investments in health, investments in relationships, writing letters, those kinds of things, the kind of the mundane maintenance that gradually brings about abundance. That's what this card is all about. Okay. So that is the nines, so this is the foundation in terms of the world we live in, right? So the foundation is created through these moments. So when you see this card, it really means that type of slow, boring but rewarding gains that knit the worlds together. Okay. And then we have nine. And nine here, the nine of, sorry, we've had nine for a while, but here we have the nine of cups. And the nine of cups, they're up on a table here, and there's a person sitting on a bench who's he's kind of uh, heavy, well-fed, happy, and is kind of enjoying this. And so this is that emotional equilibrium. And you can see his hands are crossed in a shape that looks like a figure eight, so the symbol for infinity. So he's achieved this kind of circular flow. So he's emotionally regulated. That's essentially the word for it, is the equilibrium has allowed him to be emotionally regulated. And you can see how this is a very useful contrast to the stress here. The stress doesn't mean dysregulation, but it does imply discomfort, whereas the cups can imply coming to peace, coming to a place of equilibrium. The ones The wands have some very interesting features. One is the mountains. Mountains tend to represent challenges. The other is the pavement. The pavement represents solid ground, standing on solid ground, being firmly planted. You have a person who looks a little cagey. They look like they've learned a few lessons. They've taken a hit to the head. They've been wounded, but they are now veteran in a sense. They've gone through a battle and they are strong. They are robust. So this is essentially the strength that comes from from living and from engaging with the world and from standing up. So you have the wands forming a fence that shows an overcoming of obstacles and challenges. So this is a person who has learned things, who has overcome challenges. And so these four, we look, are the foundational, we can say dreams in the unconscious or just the creative imagination. But this is where we create slow gain by seeing ourselves living the life that gradually turns into what we wish to see. By bringing into our minds the meditations that we know are wholesome and healthy, by meeting challenges and having faith in our own strength, right? That self-esteem is basically feeling like you have the ability to tackle problems, not feeling overwhelmed by problems. So you can see that any of these cards, and this one, of course, is the anxiety, but coping with it, right? Accepting it. Um, so you can see that all four of these cards could, in theory, have an unbalanced form, and that's really what's meant when we talk about reading reversals. So a reversal here would indicate uh, a person who's not ready to have self-esteem, who doesn't trust their own ability to handle challenges. Here's a person who, if this was imbalanced or reversed, it would be a person who is unsatisfied and emotionally dysregulated, or they may be um, like hungry in the sense of, hungry for something that they feel is they're lacking. And if this is unbalanced, then they're probably quite dysregulated. And if this is unbalanced, it might be any number of, maybe impatience or persistent, um, you know, lack of thriving. So there are examples where these cards, which represent human qualities, if a person is traumatized or wounded, a card may indicate, well, it can be a pointer to what we want to achieve. We want to achieve this kind of strength, but maybe we don't have it yet. But this is a good time when you look at the cards and think about the cards to practice those qualities that we want to embody. All right. So that was the nines. And so now we're going to look at the eights. And here I've called it the intellect because that's essentially what it is. Um, and these cards are all kind of more about strategies and stratagems and engagements with the world from the point of view of intelligence. So we've got the Lord of Swiftness here, which is the Eight of Wands. This is considered a positive card, and the wands are all uh, zooming very quickly, and they're getting things done. So this is instantaneous action. So remember that wands are really intention or action. They're not so much in they're not analytic. They're kind of focus. They're will based. And so here we have this, this sphere, or we'll say chamber, that is really about intelligence. And so the wands in this particular chamber represent just moving really fast and getting things done. Like this comes up in a spread, the answer is immediately. Do it immediately, or it's going to happen immediately, or it's going to be swift and quick. Sometimes, if that's with other cards that look, that it could be foolish, right? So it could be impulsive. But this is kind of just acting immediately. Um, and it is Mercury in Sagittarius. Here we've got this is the reason I like Guy's card so much is the symbolism is absolutely clear and absolutely simple, and he's got all of the words and symbols up there, so they're good learning cards. Um, the Eight of Cups, or Saturn in Pisces, is known as the Lord of Abandoned Success. So this represents when you get really tired of a project and you walk away from it before it's done and you just sort of let it go. So you're building something, and you just run out of steam for it and you walk away. Maybe it's like a PhD thesis. That's the classic, right? People often walk away from those. But it could be a job, it could be a relationship, this is just walking away from something. And I've heard very good arguments for why you might actually be a good idea to sometimes walk away from things, right? So sometimes this is like you walk away from a relationship, but in other times this is a premature walking away. So sometimes it's like a walking away for a good reason from a bad relationship, but other times it's like giving up without trying or without completing. And that's the main thing is once you complete something or you bring something towards completion, it resolves its energy. And if you leave before it resolves its energy, that surplus is lost. The pledge is kind of, the pledge is lost. You don't gain the what you would from following all the way through. So, like an online class, if you just stopped coming, yeah, maybe you got the first two classes, but something about it will not seal and it'll eventually sort of disappear. Whereas if you go to all the classes, it'll kind of seal, and you'll have done the work. And so that's the Eight of Cups. And so it's just that emotion that pulls us away from a project or from an engagement or a series of events. The longing to be elsewhere. And it's usually, happens in the build up towards completion. So a thing that is two-thirds done is in danger um, of being walked away from. And often because it's um, overthought, or the mind gets spinny. The Eight of Swords is known as the Lord of Shortened Force. So this is a case where um, the energy is not able to fully express itself, largely due to analysis paralysis. So this is the quintessential state of analysis paralysis, where we're thinking too much and we can see the pros and cons and we can't decide. So action is impossible because everything has been reduced to kinds of, well, what if this, what if that? And it's a card of kind of indecision and entrapment. So the strategies that are given, particularly in the Rider Waite deck, are strategies about how to extricate ourselves from this kind of mental entrapment. And then it's Jupiter and Gemini. So expanding, but then the expansion is split by the Gemini energy. So it can't fully expand, it's divided in two directions. And then the Eight of Pentacles is known as the Lord of Prudence. It's the Sun in Virgo, and it's essentially about doing things carefully and details, focusing on details, and getting things right and trying again and again and again and again. So this is known as the card for apprenticeships, for learning. And it's yeah, I like this card. It's very it's understated. I tend to like the understated cards. It it's an energy that gradually builds. If you practice a little bit every day, you're doing this kind of card, that diligence, slowly dripping, drip, 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 diligence. That to me feels like Eight of Pentacles energy. Um, and looking at the actual uh, RWS, which stands for Rider Waite Smith. Um, the Eight of Wands is one of the two minor arcana in the entire tarot that does not have a person in it. So the other one is the Three of Swords. But we've got this estate here up on a hill. We've got a big long river, and then these wands that are kind of bearing down. So it sort of looks like messages or just zooming in on something. So targeting something and getting it done. So it's quite in the swiftness card. Some of the cards have more some of the cards have more nuance than others, and this is one that's pretty straightforward. It doesn't the river kind of is a big, it's not really windy, it's a straightforward river. Everything here is fairly straightforward. um on the other hand, this one has got all sorts of stuff going on. You can see this Tower of Cups that has not been fully completed. It looks like it was meant to be a pyramid of cups, but this person has walked away, right? The Lord of Abandoned Success. And so things got rocky, right? And they walked away. But the thing to look at is it's an eclipse, right? This is the moon passing in front of the sun. And so if the sun is our enthusiasm for something and the moon is our kind of maybe our self-doubts, this can be an emotional eclipse. And I think that every project starts to feel at a certain point like that eclipse energy will happen. And the question is do you impulsively act during the eclipse, which, wisdom says maybe you shouldn't, or do you wait it out and let the sun come back before you decide? And the person who walks away from the thing half finished or two-thirds finished is the person who kind of impulsively makes a decision during an eclipse, and goes with it. And again, not always bad. I don't want to condemn it in every case. Eclipse energy can be great for releasing oneself from, from bondage of some sort, but it can also be giving up on something that could become excellent. And then this Lord of Shortened Force is illustrated by a woman who is standing on looks like a rocky sort of tidal pool, right? So on the shoreline. And remember, um, these cards were painted, in the early 20th century by Pamela Coleman Smith, who spent a lot of her time in Cornwall, which is in the west of England. So these are the landscapes of Cornwall, Cornwall and Devon, that kind of vibe. And so, they have the rocky, tidal sort of flats that will go out. And so this woman is kind of tied up there, sort of evoking that idea of putting someone out on the rocks, like famous Andromeda, who was chained to the rocks for the sea to come take her, for the sea monster, actually. But in this case, um, it looks like the sea is shallow, right? So the tide is it's is what we would call I guess low tide, um, and um, and that implies a time limit, right? So there's this pressure of time. So you got to decide something, but what are you going to do? Because your hands are bound, you're not able to see clearly, and you're standing on slippery rocks. That's probably the most dangerous part of this is that by standing on slippery rocks, your ground isn't solid. Remember, we saw that pavement in the nine of wands. So that pavement showed us a solid ground. Well, this is not solid ground. So you have to move very carefully and slowly to get your footing. So the first thing she has to do is get her footing. And then maybe she can cut some of her bonds on the swords, which would be basically using your thought to prioritize, right? Okay, if I'm entangled with these two opposite ideas, maybe I need to sort them out a bit and figure out what my priorities are. So get your hands free, then then clear your vision, and then leave this area. Maybe go back up to the castle or wherever you're going to go before the tide comes in. So there's that time pressure. There's this idea of paralysis or entrapment, but also how to get out of it, right? So again, Rider-Waite-Smith often shows us difficult situations, but with the strategies to evade those situations. So it's excellent. And yeah, so you have this possibility here. Okay, and then on the hello.
Can I ask a
Okay,
question?
let me okay, so I'm gonna just stop the recording.